Hello, I'm Anne-Marie Foster, and thanks for listening to Little Bangor Stories. This is the first half, excuse the pun, of a chat I had with two great names in amateur soccer in Bangor. Alan Dempster, a long-time star player and now chairman of Bryansburn Rangers, and Peter Vannucci, who's one of the few who played with the Bangor Swifts from the very beginnings of the club in the Wesley Centenary Church's Epworth Hall in the late 1960s, but who's now known for his association with Bangor FC. This is not about goals, though some are mentioned, and as you'll hear, I'm not a soccer expert, but it is a wonderful insight into the early days of the sport in Bangor and how the clubs that still exist are looking to youngsters to keep the balls rolling.
I'm Alan Dempster and I'm the chairman of Bryansburn Rangers Football Club. I've been involved with football all my life, but specifically with Bryansburn. I joined there in 1982, and when I went the first day, if anybody had said 43 years later I would still be involved at the same club, I just wouldn't have believed them, never mind to be as involved. It literally was, oh, I'll go and just see what Bryansburn's like, but somehow, the club grows on you and it becomes your club. I'll have to tell you the story of my first game, because I went down to train on the Thursday night and Bryansburn had 4 teams and they said, oh, can you play Saturday? Yes. Right, we'll give you a game for our force. So I went along to the force and it was being managed at the time by Billy Hearn. Billy Hearn was he's been a stalwart down the years right up till his death. But at the time, Billy looked at me, like I was 18, Billy looked at me to be about 70. In truth, he was probably more like about 45. But anyway, he was managing the team because they had no manager. We were way down to Ballygowan first, who were several divisions above us. And Billy's in the change room getting changed. And I'm like, what are you getting changed for? Oh, we're short today. We've only got 11. I'm going to have to make up the numbers. Anyway, Billy did centre half and he was up against this centre forward from Ballygowan called Big Birdie. Big Birdie scored 8, 6 of them with his head because Billy was small, couldn't get near him. We got beat 14-2. I did get one of the goals, like on my debut, but after that, nobody really expected me to come back because here's a young lad, up and coming, tries it out and suffers that. But I did go back the next week and it got better because I only got beat 11-1. But from then on, it was upwards. But bearing in mind the start that I had, then you've got to wonder how on earth it ever developed into a 43-year passion.
What position did you play?
When I first started, I was playing up front, but during the years I played a lot of time in midfield. I went right across the back four. Basically, in our first team, I played every position except goalkeeper. And one time we were in a match, and our keeper he broke his wrist or whatever, and we had to put a player nets. And I knew it was my chance to go in nets just to complete the set, but I didn't want to do it because. Bottom line is, it looks easier than it is, and I didn't want to cost us the game, and lucky somebody else volunteered. I had a playing career of 34 years, so I played from I was 18 up to 54. Actually, I'm an accountant and it's 36 years, so I've got that wrong for a start. Believe it or not, because we get good club records, I know Peter used to keep a lot of very good records. It's something like 1,321 League and Cup appearances, which is something that nobody will ever get near, because you got to bear in mind, back in the day, I could play for all 4 teams, and if our first weren't playing, I volunteered for the seconds, thirds, or fourths. And when it came to midweek, I maybe played Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, maybe the Monday as well, for different teams because I could. But it's all changed now, and if you play for the first team, you can't play for our thirds, and so it's impossible for anybody really to get that many games. Yes. But it is something that I'm quite proud of.
It's brilliant. Peter, what about you? How did you get involved in amateur soccer?
Well, my story goes way back to 1961.
I wasn't even born, Peter.
I was just a baby, if only. In those days, I call them the black and white days. There was no football on television. And yes, you played football in primary school, but you didn't know that there was football in the big bad world. The only football was the FA Cup final, was the only one that was televised live. And unfortunately that year Spurs were in the final, And I watched that, and then the following year they made the final again, and I've been suffering following Spurs ever since. But they were successful at the time, so I love football. My father was working on the Saturday, so he got my uncle to take me up to Clandyboy Park to watch Bangor. And unlike Alan, I don't have a good memory. I don't even know who they were playing. The only thing I remember about the match was whenever the other team scored, and in those days it was usually the other team who only ever scored, there was no scoreboard like there had been at Wembley for the FA Cup finals. And I thought to myself, there's no scoreboard here. How does anybody know the score? And that's how naive I was. And that carried on. I played a bit at primary school. Whenever we went to the big school, I didn't play football there. And it was only in later life, kept going to the Bangor matches. And then when you get to a certain age, about 17 or 18, you started to go to youth clubs. And you discovered that because at youth club there was these other strange creatures called girls. And that was one of the reasons why you went to youth clubs. But there was also a lot of fellas who had been at Bangor Grammar who weren't allowed to play football and were interested in football. Now some of them were in the BB and those sort of organisations which played football, but they seemed to stop when you got to a certain early teenage, and then there was a big gap before you got the big boy clubs. So these boys decided, the youth leaders actually decided, we'll see if we can get a football team together. And they arranged a friendly against the Rathgale School. And the youth club team went up, had a game, it was very successful. And then they had, a second game. And I actually played in the second game and actually scored the third ever goal for Bangor Swifts. And I was going to say it was the start of an illustrious playing career, but it was also probably nearly the end of a unillustrious playing career, because it suffered a lot of injury with my ankles and I really couldn't play football. And if I hadn't suffered the injuries, I probably wouldn't have been a very good footballer anyway.
And when was this youth club football team?
The youth club football,
the early 70s?
It would have been about 1969, and I've got it in the book there. Here, the match would start to go to the youth club, and it was a great place. It was the Epworth Hall down in Hambleton Road, and it was a very vibrant youth club. It was situated behind the Wesley Centenary Church. In those days, looking back, it got people off the streets. The troubles were just beginning and life was beginning to change. And it actually got a lot of people, especially young guys, off the streets. And that's when it all started, way back about 69, 70.
And who was would you say was the main person behind starting the team and pushing it on?
The youth leader was a guy called Gus Addy. He was heavily involved in the scouting movement, from what I believe. And it was also his sidekick, John Stewart, I think his name was. I'm terrible with names. And it was their idea to try and broaden the activities of the youth club, other than people just going down, sitting, listening to music. So they would arrange, for example, weekends up in Corrymeela and things like that, or barbecues in Crawfordsburn, where you walked along, the coastal path to Crawfordsburn for a barbecue and walk back. So they were just trying to broaden it. And in fairness, it was very good because although it was situated in the church, the religion aspect was more or less taken out of it, and it was a youth club where young people could congregate.
And was it called Bangor Swifts right from the start?
No, it started off, whenever they played the matches, they used the official title of the youth club, which was the Wesley Centenary Youth Guild. And that was their name. And whenever we joined the league in 1972, we decided to change the name to Epworth Hall Youth Club, which was the colloquial name of the Youth Guild. But as the team developed, obviously you couldn't rely just on youth club members, so you're bringing more outsiders in. And at the same time, the church seemed to have changed minister, and he was wanting to make the youth club more church orientated. So it was these two factors which sort of was pulling the club away from its original roots. And the strange thing was, round about that time, the football team, which had developed from Wellesley Centenary Youth Guild and had become Epworth Hall Youth Club, actually played a match against the Wellesley Centenary Youth Guild as it had developed then, and that more or less marked the end where the two clubs, had separated.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and what about Bryansburn Rangers then, Alan? Where was their inception, or where did they come from?
They were founded in 1974. So at that stage, I was only 11. I wasn't involved. As I said earlier, I arrived in 82, so I missed the first 8 years. But more than anybody, I know all the people that have been at Bryansburn, because back then everybody was older than me and I knew them all. And now everybody's bar one is younger than me and I know them all. So I'm in a very unique position.
Where are they based? Or
They were originally based in Bryansburn Inn, hence the name. And they used to play down at Connor Park. Now it really just started with a bunch of guys who, wanted to play football, for fun, and then they organised a few friendlies. They started in 1974, but that first year was just really friendly matches, as it began to take off. And I think I'm right in saying, Peter, the Down Area League started in 1974. Isn't that right? I think so.
Yes, yeah, it started in 74.
And we came in 1975, so the second year.
Yeah.
And that's an association we've had ever since, which, was great. Now we've only our third team there, but it means we've been there all but the founding year. Wow. And that was disappointing because Bangor Swifts, their third team, they were the same as us. And they were obviously there from the start, but they folded there in the course of last season, their third team now, which has lost the Swifts that association with the Down Area League, which I just thought was sad, because it would be sad if it was my own club.
Yeah. The Down Area League, is that the organisation that organises the fixtures and the league tables? Explain a wee bit of it to me.
Well, basically how it started, whenever we started off, Bangor Swifts started off, it was many ways like Bryansburn, and a lot of the clubs were similar. There were a crowd of fellas who got together to have a kickabout, and then they were getting friendly matches. But once you started playing friendly matches, you were wanting more, and you sort of ran out of opposition, so you're playing the same team over and over again. And round about that time, there was quite a few clubs sort of morphing out of sort of a crowd of fellas playing football, like Bryansburn, like Castle United, Bangor Rangers, who morphed out of a organisation called Belfast Road Rangers, which was their original name. In 1972, because the Troubles had more or less started, a lot of teams were wary of maybe going up to Belfast, and they saw there was a need for football in the North Down Ards Peninsula area. And there was a guy called Billy Kirkwood who decided to organise a league alongside another guy from Mile called, I think it was Tom Waugh, and a guy called Roy Bunting from Donaghadee. Now the funny thing is that Billy Kirkwood is actually the father of Conrad Kirkwood, who's the president of the IFA now. And he was one of the founding fathers, and they decided to form a league in 1972 called the North Down League. And I think at the start there was only 10 teams in it. And that's where Bangor Swifts got it off the ground, so there's teams in it. And I forget what they were called now off the top of my head. Mile United was one, and there was a few others from the Lower Ards, Newton Ards area. The Swifts were the only ones from Bangor. They were known as Epworth Hall at the very start. And after a couple of seasons with the North Down League going, there was a lot more interest amongst clubs who were wanting to join, but they decided they were wanting to go for quality rather than quantity. And Roy Bunting, he was quantity, he was wanting more teams involved. So he set up the rival league, which was the Down Area League in 1974. And I always remember going to the inaugural meeting, because it was held in, it may not be the Argyle, but one of the first meetings was held in Mary Street. I think it was Mary Street Orange Hall in Newton Ards. And it was getting all these teams who were starting off. And Bangor Swifts at the time had got enough players that they were able to put a second team in it. And that's where the second team started in the Down Area League. And then the following year, I think Bryansburn started in 75. But then there was four teams were formed in Bangor around about that time, namely Bangor Swifts, who were the original of the four, Bryansburn, as we know, Castle United, who were originally based in round the Whitehill estate, and they were called Skipperstone Boys then, and Bangor Rangers, who had previously called themselves Belfast Road Rangers, and they had played their matches up in what the council dump, which is where Ballyclare Sports Ground car park is now. So those four teams more or less joined round about 74, 75 and took off from there.
You mentioned, Alan, that the Bryansburn Rangers played at Connor Park. Can you remind everybody where that was?
Yes, down by Strickland's Glen. It was never a good pitch at all. You know, it was just all up and down, and every time the ball was kicked away to the side, it was lost in all the trees while you're going to try and find it. I think they also played a lot of matches. There was a pitch near Bangor Abbey. There was one there,
Bangor
which was
Abbey
on
pitch.
a real slope. I was just looking there because when I was doing research, you know, for our 50-year anniversary, which was last year, Peter was a big help. You know, we got a lot of the old league tables because this bit was obviously before my time. I'm looking at our first year, which is 1975. I'm just going down the names here with Portafogie Rangers, Clockey Rangers, Ards Blues Seconds, Ballycam Celtic, Castle United, then Bryansburn, Ballywalter Rangers, Cumbernack Force, Cotton Rangers, Bangor United, Bangor Swifts Seconds, Marino Swifts, Danesford, Ballygown Rangers, LEP United and Rosemount Rec Seconds. Now a lot of those clubs, obviously that was 50 years ago, a lot of them are no longer, you know, there. The other thing that I found amazing when I looked at the old league tables, there was obviously decisions made, like in our second or third year, we were maybe finished about 5th in the league, yet the very next season we were in Division 2 instead of Division 1, which didn't make sense. And I think at that stage they'd regionalised it, even though they called it Division 1 and Division 2. So I think there was some strange quirks that were happening in the early days rather than automatic promotion and relegation. It's just like on a whim, we'll do it this way this year. But you see, to be fair, by 1982, when I joined, the Down Area League at that stage had 5 divisions, and
So
we
that's
had
a lot of
oh
young men
yes,
wanting to play football.
and we had 4 teams, Bryansburn by then, and in my first year, our thirds and fourths were in the same division, so that was a bit of a unique experience. Because obviously your thirds should be better than your fourths. It wasn't like a wee friendly, and as far as I can remember, there was no stipulation in who you could play. You know, in other words, you could have played for your thirds in the first of those matches and played for the fourths in the other one. You didn't have to register separate players. You were all just club players.
Alan, don't tell me you were thinking you might have played ringers.
No, I'm certainly not suggesting that because that's not something that Bryansburn ever did. But I just thought it was unique. I don't think any leagues would let that happen now, where you could have 2 teams from the same, club in it. And that was the problem when I started. And I was saying about we got hammered in the first 2 matches. They had a trophy called the McCaw Shield, and what they did back in those days was everybody was in it. So it was just like an open draw, which meant our force were maybe down in Division 4 or 5, and we were drawing teams that were in Division 1. Yet our firsts were in Division 1, so you had the equivalent of our firsts or a team with their standard, playing our force. So there was some real mismatches.
A bit like the FA Cup, maybe.
The early stages.
Yes. Bangor Swifts, then they came out of the Epworth Hall, but then where did they base themselves once that link was severed?
Well, originally at the very start, they still stayed at the Epworth Hall, but once it became, a football club, as usual, the only place people could base themselves were in bars. I think our first AGM was in the Castle Arms, which is now Teddy's, yeah. And then at various times they drank in Fealties. They drank in the Jamaica Inn. I think one stage they might have been at the Helmsman. And I know they finished off in the Imperial. And I think they've been in the Imperial quite a long time. and it's certainly George McCann, because they went through some sticky patches, but he certainly helped them out.
So you had the Bryansburn Inn.
And I would like to say that Bryansburn never moved about. We were in the Bryansburn Inn from 74 until we got our own ground in 95. We weren't nomads like the Swifts, going around different bars depending on what was on offer.
So you had your bases then whenever the two teams started out, and you mentioned your friendlies were played at Connor Park, but where would the, for want of a better word, the proper matches have been played around Bangor?
Yes, when it settled down, I mean, our home pitch was at Bloomfield. Now, obviously, those pitches are still there, although there's only two. Back then, there was 4 pitches, and we shared our pitch, which was the biggest one, and I would have argued the better one down there. I mean, there were council pitches, but they were allocated to you, and we shared with Bangor Rangers first. And at that stage, our seconds played at the Valentines and shared with Bangor Rangers seconds. Now, our seconds did move about a bit. For a while, we were based where Bangor Amateurs currently are, in the pitch beside Bangor FC on the Clannyboy Road. So we did move about, and we also played up at Ballywoolly. I mean, there was always association there with Ballywoolly. It was used by the BB and also by Bryansburn.
And what about the Swifts? Were you allocated pitches as well by the council? Or?
The Swifts, you talk about pitches, and we have mentioned some pitches which existed back in the day and which don't exist now. We've mentioned Connor Park. Connor Park was originally used a lot for primary schools because the posts were actually smaller than standard size goal posts, and it was never marked. It was never a proper pitch. Alan's mentioned the Abbey pitch. It was situated there beside the Marcus Hall, behind the Abbey Church, and I know the primary schools used it, and at the start I think the Swifts used it quite a bit, and I remember Bangor Abbey went on to make it their home pitch, and now it's just covered in the planted trees and bushes in it.
But it would have had a bit of the same problem as Connor Park. I mean, if you had kicked a ball the wrong way, you're way down chasing it.
Many a time the ball ended up on Abbey Street, and it was no joke, especially when you got another team who were a bit belligerent to do it deliberately.
It was terrible. I need to tell you about Ballywoolly, even though that's our own ground now, but it was a lot different back then.
That's out to Crawfordsburn Road.
Yes. On the way to Crawfordsburn, just after St Gall's Church. But it always had 2 pitches, and one was right adjacent, to the hedge on the main road. But first of all, it was on a big slope, but then it also sloped left or right. So if you were like playing up the hill and you had a corner in the far right, you actually couldn't see who was in the box when you were taking the corner. You were trying to swing, just hoping that somebody was there because it came down so far. The accommodation, it was basically 2 porta cabins. There was no electrics, there was no sewage, there was nothing. And there was holes in the roof. I mean, I suppose you could argue you got a shower that way if it was raining. So what happened was you played your match, and obviously if we were playing in the winter, the match was finished and it was nearly pitch black. Then you were coming in, but no lights and no water to wash. And you were groping about. Of course, you had no mobile phones with a flashlight. You're groping about to try and find your clothes. You're dirty. And you couldn't find exactly what you needed, to get dressed. It was a crazy set of affairs. And then we had a few guys like Roy Beattie, who was the chairman at the time, and he used to bring a massive big canister with him of hot water, a big, maybe, I don't know how many litre drum, it doesn't matter. And that's how he would have had his shower. While everybody was just having to accept that they were dirty, he got it and he was pouring the hot water over himself and giving himself a quick wash. Because afterwards we were going down to the Bryansburn to maybe have a few drinks and a bite to eat. And people were going in literally to the toilets to try and wash their hands because they're just caked in muck.
Well, what about the pitches that the Swifts used? I don't remember any changing facilities in Castle Park. I might be wrong, but...
Well, we've mentioned, the facilities there at Ballywoolly and talking about, the porta cabins. Whenever you played the Abbey, you didn't have those facilities. The changing rooms were behind a tree. The toilets were behind a tree, and the showers were non-existent unless it was raining. And it's only whenever you travelled to other places where they had humane changing rooms.
Yeah.
The Valentines were converted stables. The showers worked, but it was usually cold water. You never knew what shower room you were in. You shared with the other team, and if there'd been a bit of bother with the other team, sometimes it wasn't the nicest going into these cold showers with belligerent players from the other team. And it was just, but looking back, it was so primitive.
The Swifts, I mean, I remember their pitch well, because obviously that's where we used to play. What's actually sad these days, when pitches disappear. So when Aurora was built there, they took away maybe 3 or 4 of the pitches, and so many of my memories are to do with those pitches. You know, when Peter's talking about the one Bangor Swifts played on, year after year after year, I have so many memories. Not some good, some bad. You know, some amazing games, some real battles. And I just thought it was a bit sad when they're all taken away, even the changing rooms and all.
Yeah.
Despite what you're saying, Peter, and you are right about it, you just sort of miss it.
You know, they're just dug up or built on.
See, they've done the same over at Ards now, because there were pitches there at Derry Hall where the leisure centre is now. Similar ideas, lots of memories down the years there. And Londonderry Park. Now, although Londonderry Park is still there and being used, you know, for hockey and football and so on, quite a number of the pitches are gone. I mean, some of them have been replaced by 3G, but not necessarily, you know, in the exact same place. Others are gone altogether. And could be said is true for quite a lot of Bangor and Ards. Yet the funny thing is, when you go further down the peninsula, nothing has really changed, because most of those you know, wee villages or whatever had only one pitch, so it's still there. I'm talking about like Portavogie, Grey Abbey, you know, with Rosemount, Ballywalter. They always had one pitch, and it's still there, because there'd probably be uproar if they tried to get rid of it. Whereas up in Bangor and Ards, they just seem, we're going to build a leisure centre here, we'll just get rid of a few pitches.
Well, now, to be fair, I mean, in the early 1970s, whenever this explosion of interest in amateur soccer was taking place and all these clubs were forming, were there many efforts made to provide land for pitches for all these clubs, or was it a real scramble to get one allocated for a season?
It was a real scramble. It was a real dog eat dog, and I think in some cases clubs sort of didn't go ahead and participate in leagues because they couldn't get pitches. And I remember being on the committee of you know, the Down Area League, and people were coming up, where are you going to play? Well, we're hoping to get such and such or such and such. And when you find out there's very little chance of getting it, you know, and which was sad. And, you know, and looking back, the council have done away with a lot of these facilities in the good places, and then they're wondering about young kids and antisocial behaviour. As I keep repeating, it takes kids off the street.
Yes, but as you were saying, the thirds have folded. Does Bryansburn Rangers still have all its teams?
We moved from 4 teams down to about 3.
Is it a chicken and egg situation? Is it the lack of pitches means young people aren't wanting to play anymore, or has there been a different shift in attitudes to?
It's a different generation. It is quite simple. Back then, football was all that mattered. Everybody that I knew lived and breathed it, and it was the most important thing. Nowadays, youngsters have got a lot more interests. They're not as dedicated. I mean, we would have trained Tuesday and Thursday for 2 hours, and the training facilities we had were woeful. You wouldn't get away with it today. We were in the farmyard there at the Valentines. I don't know if you remember it. The big wall's still there. Well, that's where it was. So it was like gravel pitch. The amount of holes and all that were in it. I mean, I'm surprised there wasn't more people breaking their leg. And like health and safety and all, they wouldn't let you be there. But we were there 4 hours a week. Nowadays, my club, they train at Aurora during the season, and they do 1 hour Tuesday and 1 hour Thursday, but you'll get boys going, I can't train 2 nights a week. So they're only actually doing 1 hour when we would have done 4. They're just not as dedicated. They've turned around after training Tuesday and Thursday. You okay for the weekend? No, I'm away to watch Liverpool. Whereas I support Leeds, but if I went to see Leeds, I went to a midweek match, so they didn't miss my Bryansburn match. Now it just doesn't seem to be as important. And obviously I'm still heavily involved, but from speaking to people in other clubs, the issues that we would have are right across the board with everybody. They're all having the same. Guys don't want to pay their money. They maybe don't want to support your functions. You know, you're doing fundraisers and all. We would have had fundraisers way back in the 80s, and no matter what we did, you'd get 100, 140 there every time. Now we do a fundraiser, you're lucky to get 50. Because guys, it's what they can get out of it, not what they're prepared to put in.
And you would that echo the experience of the Swifts?
Well, that would echo the experience, and you know, no, we've talked about Bryansburn and the Swifts. I would say Bryansburn have managed to have a steadier ship, you know, for longer. The way the Swifts seem to have gone is that they were doing well up to a while, and then that generation gets older, drifting away. You know, the Swifts' successful years were way back whenever everybody was in their early 20s and that type of thing. But what seems to have happened is a lot of these clubs, and Bangor Swifts especially, they're a great example. They've started academies for kids and for young girls as well. And the case of Bangor Swifts, as I say, I'm not directly involved with them, but I obviously do follow their fortunes. They seem to be stronger in Bangor Swifts Junior than on the senior side. And I think in talking to them, it seems to be a case of they're hoping that some of those young kids will come through and then strengthen the senior side.
Bryansburn Rangers have academies for kids and girls and things like that.
Yes, we were out of youth football for quite a while, and just went back into it a year ago. And funny enough, we've just passed this week over 100 kids, which we're very pleased about in the course of a year. What I'd like to add to what Peter was saying, I think it's really about succession. And again, I think all clubs are fighting this. The people that have been running clubs are running them for years. And whenever those guys decide to step away or get too old to do it, there's a lack of succession planning. There's not the same willingness for, you know, young ones to get involved. Now, I would include in that the leagues. The two leagues that we play in are the Down Area League, as we've talked about, which is where our thirds play, and then the Northern Amateur Football League, which is where the Swifts first and seconds play, and ours. But even on that league committee, there are guys there in their 70s and their 80s, and they are struggling. They've now been on those committees maybe for 40, 50 years. They're looking for youngsters to come through. I've got approached so many times, and I say to them, look, I am working full time, and I've enough of a job trying to run my own club without giving up, you know, further time to run the leagues. But other clubs, I think, are fighting the same, and I think Peter was suggesting that regarding the actual running of the club, a lot of good guys, once they stepped aside, you know, clubs are maybe not being, you know, run just as well.
Yeah.
I need to say mine is run well because I am still there, just before there's any confusion.
But I think you're right, and it's like everything. If you have a successful, thriving soccer club, there are people who won't be playing on the pitch, but they're just as important in the running of it and the organising it. And as they all get older, they do need people to come in and help them out. But perhaps the academies are the future in some ways. What do you think?
The academies, yes, but the problem with an academy, and I can't really say, but is that you become interested in an academy if you've got a wee Johnny or Freddie playing for them, and you follow them through, and then what happens to them after that? You know, that person loses interest in the academy, and there's others coming through, and that's just the natural scheme of things.
The loyalty's not there, Peter. What actually happens, because we have experienced it, you know, we were pioneers of youth football back in the day when we had 8 teams from under 10 to under 18, and you'll get a lot of boys that are maybe there from at your club from 9 years old to 16, 17, and guess what? Then they go to play with their mates. You know, you'd like to think that in that time there's a bit of loyalty is built up. Loyalty is one thing that the Bryansburns always been very good at. We have had so many guys played for our club for 15, 20, 25 years more. And a lot of other clubs aren't like that. You know, you could go to different clubs who was here 5 years ago and nobody was. Because in this day and age, Peter was suggesting there's some boys follow the money, others are maybe following glory. But the bottom line is they just go wherever they think is the best place for them. You see, if your club is in hard times, they jump ship just as quick. And there's been clubs just lately, we talked about some earlier there, Bangor Rangers had 4 teams, they're totally gone now. Castle United had 3 teams, they're totally gone. Ards Blues had a couple, they're gone. So many teams have literally folded because when the push came to shove, guys didn't want to dig in and fight to keep their club there. And the good thing is that at least our 2 clubs are still there. And we've got there's people at both clubs who are trying to make sure that they survive. I'm just trying to make the point. You lose a few players, and others are going, oh, this is a sinking ship. Right, I'm in the first lifeboat, and they're away. And I just think that that's sad. But I'm passionate about my club, the same way Peter's also passionate about Bangor Swifts. But new ones today, you know, I couldn't say the same thing. They're at Bryansburn while things are going well, and if we fall in hard times, there are some of the younger ones who will be away just as quick, and it's just sad.
It is sad. It also has to be said at this point here that people like Alan, and I'm not trying to bum up or anything, but
No, you can if you want.
The amount of time and effort people like Alan has put in over a long time isn't fully appreciated. And it's all voluntary. It bites into your personal life, and you know you could be out shopping and you're thinking, oh God, I wonder how this match is going to go. I wonder what player's going to turn up and all that's here. It actually sort of eats into your life, so it does. And the people who run football clubs like that aren't fully appreciated. The sad thing is, there are too many. There have been in the past too many clubs where they're dependent on 1 or 2 people, and once something happens to one of those 1 or 2 people. The fold. Alan's mentioned some club, you know, mentioned the Castle United, you know, the Bangor Rangers, who are 2 of the 4 teams who start around the same times as ourselves, are no longer here. But there's hundreds of other clubs. There's the Bangor Uniteds, Ballyholme Rangers, Ocean Boulevard, and you could start trotting out names of clubs which have come. Some have been successful, some not so successful, but then they faded away as the group got older, or things went bad, or the people running them sort of had to drop out for whatever reason, and the club folds. You know, so clubs like Bryansburn, they're lucky they've had people. You've kept them going for well over 50 years now, isn't it?
Yeah,
well over half a century is a long time.
Although I would say that there's a lack of respect, like. Even in my own club, I'm talking about maybe the young lads, you know, 18, 19, 20. I'm probably seen as the guy, oh, he runs the club, you know, and I'm in some cases maybe older than their grandparents. You know, it's hard to know what they, you know, how they actually perceive me, because I'm not perceived as a guy who was a good footballer, because it was way before their time. I will have to throw in a wee story which always made me laugh. When I was about 19, there was a guy who I could tell was a good footballer in his day. You called him Jimmy Case, but in my book he was about 70, because I'm 19, up and coming player. I'm like, you can tell he was a good player, but all he needs to do, put a nail in them. I was probably a wee bit of an upstart, and I always give him a hard time. And then a few years ago, I bumped into him, and I was in my 50s at that stage, and he says, oh, Dempsey, I see you're still playing. I says, yes, you know what I wanted to do? I always wanted to play to the same age you did. He says, yeah, you know what my biggest regret was? I wish I'd played till I was 40. And I'm like, what, you mean you didn't? He says, no, I hung the boots up at 37, which means when I was shouting at him to put a nail in them, he was maybe 36. And I was thinking, he looked about 70. And then I carried on playing till I was about 54, and I'm thinking, the young lads, what are they thinking of me now? You know, maybe not saying it to my face, what are they saying, you know, behind my back? But that always did, you know, did make me laugh. Just how you're perceived, and I think it's sad. I just really do believe it's a different generation, you know, coming through. And the bit that they don't seem to get, how quick your football career goes, because you do get some that are literally wasting their talent. You know, they're not going training, they're missing games. Some of them even pack the game in up for a bit, you know, and you try and say you'll regret this. I don't regret 1 minute, because the amount of memories and friendships that I made down all those years of playing, I mean, it was absolutely fantastic. And that's not just friends in my own club. There are guys there that you knew down the years, that you played against year in, year out. You got to know them, even though you had rivalry on the pitch. You maybe decide to go down the town one night and you walk in and you meet people. So you do. And you haven't seen them for years, and then you talk about the
old times, yeah.
The old days.
That's our first half over. Time for oranges, but no team talk necessary. Aren't Alan and Peter great? We'll be back very soon with the second part. So please like, share and subscribe.